another thing, do you uh Lu, do you remember the former ambassador to France, Lu Shaye?
Right.
His tenure ended last month. He went back to China, but now he is now the new representative to Europe. So
Right.
he in a way so he is now the ambassador to EU from China now.
Right.
So in a way he got promoted, right? Now I noticed that the West see him as a hawk, towards the West. So for example, Le Monde, this is what Le Monde report on this is saying Lu Shaye, China's wolf warrior diplomat, appointed a special representative to Europe. Known for his vehement, even aggressive rhetoric toward Western countries, China's ex-ambassador to France arrives at a time when relationship between Beijing and Brussels are fraught with tension. Just so you know, Lu, Ambassador Lu, he is not regarded as hawk in China. People just feel like he is the normal guy. The people who are really hawkish, you don't find that in the Chinese government. You find them in the social media. There are some
Hmm.
hawks talking about, against the West.
Hmm.
Most people actually think the Chinese officials are too nice, too soft. They're very restrained,
Hmm.
So just because of that, I guess Lu is regarded as the aggressor, as the hawk.
Yeah.
What is your take on the whole thing?
Well, can I just say something? I mean, I don't know whether this wolf warrior expression has a Chinese origin,
Uh-huh.
but the way it's thrown back at China in the West is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
Western officials, Western diplomats, so-called diplomats, spend all their time saying the most terrible things about China.
Mm-hmm.
They are unbelievably rude and abusive about China. I was reading recently, I went through all, the State Department website, and I was reading all the things that Marco Rubio has been saying when he meets European officials about China. And he talks about China's malign activities.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that kind of language. We remember, I mean, we all remember Tony Blinken coming along and how rude he was and arrogant he was when he met with Chinese officials. And it wasn't just him. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Joe Biden standing up in Congress and
Yeah.
calling Xi Jinping all sorts of things and telling people that Xi Jinping was a dictator. No, a dictator. And nobody says, this is out of order. And then sometimes Chinese officials speak up for their country, which is what diplomats are supposed to do. They reiterate their position about that China has, and then of course they get called wolf warriors. I mean, the hypocrisy here, the double standards are so extreme that it's difficult to know what to say. As I said, I don't know whether this wolf warrior thing originates in a Chinese expression. But I mean, if you ask me, this whole narrative about aggressive Chinese diplomats and officials is absolute bilge. It's nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
And for the record, I've listened to many Chinese officials in my time. I've read many Chinese commentaries. I've listened to Xi Jinping. I've read Chinese readouts. The thing that distinguishes, for me, the Chinese amongst all major countries
Mm-hmm.
is how polite they are.
Yeah.
It's clearly a part of their diplomatic style. I mean, they're very firm,
Mm-hmm.
but they are always very polite. Much more polite than the Russians, by the way. Just
Mm-hmm.
saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's actually one of the complaints. A lot of the netizens feel like they think they're too
Yeah,
polite.
yeah,
That they want the officials to speak up more, right?
yeah.
To resist all these belligerent foreign.
I'm going to push back against the netizens here. I think that not only does it win China friends, the
Mhm.
fact that it is so polite, which it does. I mean, it means that the president of Senegal can meet with Xi Jinping and can come away from the meeting after 20 minutes and feel that he's been taken seriously and listened to in a way that he doesn't get that experience from Westerners. Not only does it win friends for China around the world, but I'm going to say something. Dealing with the West, it's the best thing you can do. It absolutely infuriates the West when they are so rude to China and they get polite responses thrown back at them. They can't deal with that at all. It drives them mad.
Yeah, that and that's why when Ambassador Lu said something, they immediately got
Yeah,
shocked by it. Like,
yeah,
how can you talk back, right? So
yeah. Oh,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. But it's regarded, I mean, it is be interpreted as China does not take pressure from the West because they call him, the hawk and the wolf warrior, but yet he is now being promoted to be the ambassador to EU. So
Well, it's absolutely true. China does not take pressure from the West. I mean, that ought to be, as I said many times, the
mm,
first law of international diplomacy. Don't bluff China. Your
mhm,
bluff will always be called. I've said this many times in many places. Absolutely, China is not going to take any pressure from the West. Why should it?
mm,
Why would it, given the history? Of course it won't. I mean, of course the Chinese will defend their positions and their own interests. They will always do so in a very polite way, using very, very measured language. But what Westerners want, not just of China, but of every
mhm,
country, is that, the West will be as rude as it wants to be and as aggressive as it wants to be. And people will listen and fold their arms and listen to these lectures and nod and agree to the West and say, you're so, so right. We're so, so bad. Of course, we're going to go away and do all of the things. We're the bad boy in the school and you're the wise teacher and we will listen to you. Well, China's not going to play that game. It's absurd to think it will. Anybody who thinks that does not know China and its history and its civilization and its people.
mm. Now, I'm just saying that I just observed that Lu Shaye, he actually is he's pretty active. He was
Yeah,
taking interviews from the
mm,
France media, and he has been very firm.
yeah,
Just like you said, he's firm in terms of defending his country and
yeah,
correct. Lots of time they have a lot of just misinformation, sometimes
yeah,
downright lies about China. So
yeah.
he correct them. So that's why he's regarded as the wolf warrior. So
Wolf warrior.
be
Mm.
interesting to see. Yeah. He I think he will be a powerful voice, actually, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yes, I mean, sometimes you have to say things as they are. I
Mhm.
think if a diplomat who doesn't do that, by the way, is a very, very bad diplomat. I mean,
Mhm.
you have to be clear and firm. I mean, there's no reason to be rude, but
Mhm.
firmness, and straightforwardness are sometimes absolutely needed in the
Mhm.
conduct of international relations. And I'm sure Ambassador Lu, who I'm sure is an extremely experienced and very well trained diplomat, will be exactly that.
Mhm. I want to ask you about this Belavezha Accords. Now, the
Yeah.
reason is that Ambassador Lu, I don't know if you remember,
Mm.
he was giving an interview with some media, and they were talking about the Ukraine war and saying that Russia doesn't have this agreement or that agreement, just legally it cannot do this and that, etc. And then Ambassador Lu at the time mentioned that, well, if you only go with accords and with agreements and signed ones, then the Baltic countries cannot be regarded as independent
Um,
because they never signed the Belavezha Accords, and that got him a lot of trouble.
yeah.
So, okay,
Even though it's true. Anyway, carry on.
I want to ask you about this Belavezha Accords. Why didn't the Baltic countries sign together with all
Well,
the other countries?
because they argued that they had never been part of the Soviet Union in the first place. They insisted that they were conquered countries that the Soviet Union had occupied, and that their independence had been stolen from them. So, and they had a certain amount of support from the United States, which also never recognized the Baltic states as part of the Soviet Union, because every other European country did recognize the Baltic states as part of the Soviet Union. And I'm going to say something else. It would have been a very, very good idea for the Baltic states if they had signed those accords,
Yes.
because that way, that would have provided a framework for them to develop their long-term relations with Russia. Of
Mhm.
course, they never did that. And now apparently they're becoming very frightened. And I'm hearing stories that They're worried that after the Ukraine war, their position will be become extremely insecure. Well, the only people who are to blame for that ultimately are the Baltic states, because
Mhm.
they forgot that Russia is their neighbor
Mhm.
and they need to have good relations with it. They never saw that. But anyway, there we are.
Yeah, I think if you sign that, then it's there. You have a written document to saying we are an
Absolutely.
independent country, right? So,
Exactly.
and you agree
Exactly.
to it, Russian, you agree
Exactly.
to it. So, well, I
Exactly.
find that's a little bit stupid, but okay.
Well, it's what happens when you allow rhetoric
Uh,
to take control of your or, of your entire policy.
um,
You start to lose touch with reality. What the Baltic states needed to do was firstly to sign those accords, accept that they had been a part of the Soviet Union, even if an unwilling one,
uh-huh.
and work to develop stable long-term relations with Russia, which, when
Mhm.
all is said and done, will always be the great power in that region. They didn't do any of those things.
Mhm.
They wanted to continue to insist that they be these victim countries who had been brutally occupied by the Soviet Union, which, to some extent was true. I mean, I'm not
Yeah. Mhm.
disputing
Yeah.
that that was an aspect of it. I mean, the Russians have their own things to say. It's
Mhm.
also true to say that from the late 1950s, the Baltic states actually prospered quite well inside the
Mhm.
Soviet Union, and that
Yeah.
their living standards rose significantly, and that they industrialized as a result of their association with the Soviet Union. Of course, they don't want to talk about any of that. But,
Mhm.
put all that aside. I mean, instead of looking at the history overall, looking at the realities, looking at the geography. I'm sorry about the dog.
Yeah. Yeah.
Looking at the
That's fine.
geography and saying to yourself, what is our actual best interests? Our best interest is to have good relations with the Russians. Well, as I said, it became more important to them to talk about their history all the time, about the way they'd been persecuted, about the evil Russians, and all of that. And now they are where they are in. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the
Mm.
same thing with actually, if you, I can see where they come from, right? Because
Mm.
with Hong Kong, there is in China, there's discussion that should Hong Kong be regarded as a part of Britain, or it's always been part of China but occupied by British. There's have that discussion. But nonetheless, they still, at the end of the day, negotiated with Margaret
Yeah.
Thatcher, and there was a declaration. So there are
Correct.
sides. So
Correct.
regardless
I
how you
mean,
interpret, right?
yeah,
So.
absolutely. I mean, can I just say the legal position on Hong Kong actually is absolutely clear. I mean, the Qing Emperor was forced to grant Britain.
Mhm.
I think it was in a 99 or 100-year lease.
Yes.
Now,
Mhm.
there was a small amount of territory which the
Three.
British gained
Yeah.
complete control over,
Yeah.
but by far the bigger part of Hong Kong was controlled by the British as a lease. So, and the British always recognized it
Uh-huh.
as a part of China.
Yeah. Hmm.
But as you absolutely rightly say, the Chinese did not say to themselves that the British are occupiers, they're imperial powers. That means we can just ignore them. The,
Uh-huh.
the Chinese, very pragmatically and realistically, negotiated with the
Uh-huh.
British and came to an agreement in everyone's interests,
Yeah.
which of course was subsequently violated by the Western powers, which is another story.
Uh-huh.
But I mean, this is where you simply cannot compare the quality of statecraft of a country like China with that of the Baltic states. I mean, China, the oldest country in the world with the greatest tradition of statecraft in the world, with these three very, very small,
Mhm.
frankly, rather provincial places. I mean, there's
Yeah.
just no comparison. The people who are to blame here are the Western powers. The
Mhm.
Western powers should have told the Baltic states, look, in your own interests,
Yeah.
you need good relations with Russia. Of
Mhm.
course, they did the opposite.
Yeah. Yeah. And not signing it, I don't think it's helped them in any
No,
shape or
no,
form. So
no,
now they
no.
don't have a real document to show we are
Mm,
independent country. They
correct,
don't have that.
correct.
Right.
They
So,
don't have that.
so
Exactly.